Okay, today's topic is the Mississippi River. The Friends of the Mississippi River is a leading citizen organization working to protect and enhance the Mississippi River in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The Mississippi is one of the great rivers of the world in a complex ecosystem of global significance. How many of you have been to the headwaters? All right, you walked across the Mississippi there, okay. For more than 35 years, our speaker today has worked to improve the Minnesota environment as a staff member of several environmental organizations. During his 26-year tenure as executive director of the Friends of the Mississippi River, he has led this organization from a growth of a startup of one full-time employee to one of Minnesota's largest and most effective conservation organizations, with now a staff of 24. He's extensive experience in environmental policy, lobbying, advocacy, education campaigns, and partnership building around the environmental and social justice issues. He has his bachelor's degree from the University of Minnesota, so please give a nice warm welcome to Whitney Clark.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. What a pleasure it is, and it's great to see people who aren't afraid to come out in the Minnesota winter and get together. I'm going to talk about the river today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my organization, Friends of the Mississippi River, and I'll try to save some time for Q&A as well. But if people have questions, burning questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to raise your hand. Friends of the Mississippi River is a 30-year-old organization. We were formed because our founders thought there should be a professional organization in the Twin Cities dedicated to protecting and restoring the public values of the great river that flows through our community. As Don said as part of the introduction, the Mississippi is, one of the great rivers of the world. It's an ecological resource of global significance. It's a flyway for 40 million waterfowl in North America, as well as countless millions of songbirds and raptors. It is also, even though the river passes through many major metropolitan urban areas, it's still a really important migratory corridor for many species of fish and mammals and mussels. And of course, anybody who's been in the Twin Cities very long knows it has enormous significance, cultural significance. Photo that you're looking at here is the Indian Mounds in St. Paul, a place that has been significant to dwellers of this area for thousands of years. It's, of course, why the Mississippi River, why our communities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, are here. Minneapolis, of course, was founded on the banks of the river to take advantage of St. Anthony Falls and the hydropower that could be generated there for lumber milling and later flour milling. St. Paul, there's a photo of the confluence, of course, Bedote, the confluence of the two great rivers, Minnesota and the Mississippi Rivers, was a sacred site for Native American people, and it later was the site of historic Fort Snelling in the 1820s. As we go forward in time, of course, St. Paul was founded where it was because it was the furthest place upstream that steamboats could land reliably in a normal water year. The river is also growing in importance for its recreational values. People are using the river for paddling, for bird watching. Bird watching is now one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing outdoor pastime in America. And as I said earlier, the Mississippi River corridor is one of the great places to find birds. And something that I like to mention, because it's easy to overlook, but I think you all know what I mean when I say the river is also a place in our busy urban lives where we can still go to find peace and solitude and natural beauty, and I think we still need that. How many of you knew that our stretch of the Mississippi River through the Twin Cities is a national park? Okay, we've got a couple of people paying close attention. A lot of the groups that I talk to, nobody raises their hands. But this stretch of the river from Dayton and Ramsey in the north all the way down to the Goodhue County border south of Hastings was designated by Congress as a unit of the National Park Service in 1988. And it was designated because of its very, very unique and special character. By the way, it's the only national park that's about the river on the entire length of the river. There are Civil War battlefields, there's the St. Louis Arch, but this is the only park that's about the river. And so I just wanted to remind you, those of you who've been in the Twin Cities and are familiar with the geography, some of this will be a reminder, but there are three very distinct reaches of the river. It's three very different rivers through our Twin Cities stretch. In fact, it changes more in our 72-mile stretch of the river than it does anywhere else along the length of the river. If you imagine, this is a photo looking at downtown Minneapolis from the north, from North Minneapolis, and you will recognize that the river up there is a prairie river. It's got very low banks as opposed to high bluffs. It's got a defined channel. The river has been in that channel for thousands of years. When the river drops over St. Anthony Falls in downtown Minneapolis, it drops into the only gorge on the entire length of the river, which is characterized by these massive scenic limestone, sandstone bluffs that rise 80 to 100 feet above the river. As you see in this photo, the river fills the entire gorge in most places from bluff to bluff. There's very little floodplain. And it's also notable because it's almost entirely publicly owned parkland in the gorge. And then here's a photo of the third reach, the big floodplain river. This is when the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers come together, it opens up into this big, broad floodplain river that most people around the world, when you mention the Mississippi River, that's what they're thinking of. They're thinking of the river of Huck Finn, Mark Twain's Mississippi River, which could be up to 3 miles across from bluff to bluff. And the river meanders and has all these many, many islands and black backwaters and sloughs that make it such a rich ecological resource. So all of this we have right in our national park here in the Twin Cities. Just a little bit about my organization, Friends of the Mississippi River. We have over 2,500 members. We have a group of what we call river guardians. These are people who volunteer to take action, often writing a letter to their state legislator or the governor or some other action to protect the river. We use volunteers throughout our work, and last year we had over, over 1,700 volunteers. And we have a real commitment now, a focus on engaging young people in our work, because after all, that is the next generation of river advocates and stewards. We do our work across these three program areas: land conservation, we work on land use and planning, regulation, water, which is primarily a policy area of work, and then hands-on stewardship and education, and I'll talk a little bit about each of these today. As I said, this is our 30th year, so we're excited to be growing into our big boy boots. We have 23, almost 24 staff now, and 16 board members who govern the organization. The land conservation program is focused on protecting and restoring landscapes along the river and its key tributaries for their ecological functions. So in a major urban area like this, a lot of the land is developed, and so the remaining landscapes that are not developed become increasingly important. And so one of the things we try to do is find these places that still provide ecological functions like habitat and get them protected. So we work with landowners to do that. Once we protect an area, then we also we have several ecologists on staff, and we work to restore the health of the native plant and animal communities on those sites. I'll give you one example here. This is Hampton Woods, which is located along one of the tributaries, one of the really important tributaries to the Mississippi, down in Dakota County, the Vermilion River. This was the largest remaining big woods remnant forest in Dakota County. And we worked with some of the landowners you can see pictured here to protect about half of that parcel, and we're now in the process of restoring it. So we did the outreach to the landowners who had a conservation ethic. They wanted to see their land protected rather than developed, and we worked with the Department of Natural Resources to turn their property into a wildlife management area. Here is another kind of choppy video of another piece of property up near Monticello. This is Elk River. This is the William Holton Conservation Area. It's right at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Elk Rivers. And it's about a 340-acre parcel. This prairie that you're seeing here in the foreground was formerly soybeans before we protected it. You can see the river there emerging on the horizon. There's more than a mile of Mississippi riverfront is now protected and in public ownership. And it is formerly a privately owned farm. Actually, it's been in agriculture since the Civil War, and we worked with the landowners and with the city of Elk River to protect it permanently as open space and natural area. So it's a city park, city conservation area. It's open to the public, and it's an amazing place to visit. This is a map. I don't know how well you can see that from the back, but this is a map of some of our conservation areas in the Twin Cities. And you can see the one I was just talking about way up there in Elk River. Another example of a really, really significant natural area that we have worked over the last 25 years to protect and restore is a place called Pine Bend Bluffs down in at the border, kind of the border between Rosemount and Invergrove Heights along the river. This is an incredibly scenic area of these rare bluff prairies and these rugged ravines, and at the top historically was oak savanna. And we have been able to work with private landowners to protect a bunch of this land as a scientific and natural area, which is owned by the state of Minnesota. And then we're continuing to work with private landowners like Flint Hills Resources, the refinery down there, to restore their private land, to make sure that it's still available for the critters that find that habitat very important. One of the important things about our work is we A lot of this restoration is hard, sweaty work, and we engage thousands of volunteers every year in helping us restore these very special places. So a couple of our super volunteers out there cutting buckthorn. Closer to downtown, we've been actively working with the Park and Recreation Board in Minneapolis to restore areas, natural areas in the parkland around Nicollet Island. And so, you know, in addition to the sort of the result, by engaging people, those of you who volunteer regularly know that when you've helped to create something, there's an extra special feeling that you were part of that. And that's one of the goals we have, is not just to protect these places and restore these places, but to help people feel like they have had a role in that, and that they, I think that has the effect of making them care more about it in the future and wanting to see it persist. This is another site in Minneapolis, upstream, North Minneapolis, upstream from St. Anthony Falls. Some of our volunteers on a planting on a cold spring morning. I mentioned the gorge before. This is this very unique stretch of the river that you can see here. It was formed over the last 12,000 years as St. Anthony Falls receded. It had a very unique geology, still has a very unique geology, where the river was flowing over the falls, and the top layer of the geology was this very brittle limestone, and underneath the limestone is this very soft sandstone. And so as the river would flow over the limestone, it would undercut and erode the sandstone, so the sandstone would kind of be eroding, and eventually the limestone would not be able to support its own weight, and it would break off. And in that way, over about 12,000 years, St. Anthony Falls migrated from, believe it or not, that where downtown St. Paul is today, all the way up to its current location in Minneapolis. And one of the things that people don't realize is that if you've looked at St. Anthony Falls, you'll see that it's got a cement apron, a cap over it. So it can no longer erode as long as we maintain that cap. But had it been allowed to continue to erode, that unique limestone and sandstone condition only exists for another about 150 yards upstream. So had it continued for another, some number of years, eroding, it would have disappeared. And we wouldn't have St. Anthony Falls anymore. So, little piece of interesting history. And I mentioned before, almost all the land in the gorge is owned by the two parks agencies, Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board and St. Paul Parks Department. And it's a continuing gift to all of us in the Twin Cities who use it. It's one of the most, I think it's the second most visited of the parks in the Twin Cities. And we have been working with both park agencies for years to do natural resources restoration, much of which is removing invasive species like buckthorn and honeysuckle so that the native forest can thrive. I want to talk a little bit about our stewardship and education work. I've mentioned that we engage people in our restoration volunteer outings. We do education in K-12 classrooms about the river. And we also have a growing emphasis on youth programming and building leaders among the next generation, so that there's people, when old fogies like me tip off the conveyor belt, there's somebody behind me to take over. These are some of the different stewardship areas. So where one of our models has been to work with local community groups of people who say, yeah, I want to be involved in this local place, like the Mississippi River Gorge in Minneapolis or St. Paul, or Pine Bend Stewards down in Invergrove Heights. This is my local place, and I want to take ownership of that place. And we train those volunteers, and then they go out and they know what to do when they get out there and how to remove invasives and how to take care of it. So they can be out there more often than our staff or our contractors can be. Just some of the results of our volunteering back in 21. I should update that slide. Lots of other events, helping people to make rain barrels so that they can manage the stormwater runoff from their yards. We do this storm drain stenciling program in the Twin Cities. So you often see this little stencil next to storm drains that says, please don't dump anything in here. This flows directly to a local water body, whether it's a lake or a stream, and eventually, of course, to the Mississippi River. And that's a great way to help make people who do it aware of their street, their community's connection to the river. So we're proud of all the young people who are coming through our program in recent years. I want to say a little bit about water. Of course, the Mississippi River is full of water and ice today. I drove over it on the way here. Looks chilly. But of course, the health of the water in the river is related to the entire landscape that drains to the river. And one of our key emphasis has been helping to clean up the river using public policy, educating policymakers and the public, and then also making sure that we're addressing the largest source of pollutants to the Mississippi River, which is agriculture. So, many people are aware that the river is cleaner than it used to be. When I was coming up, I remember how smelly the river was, and my dad would say, it's very polluted. For some reason, though we loved to swim when I was a kid, we weren't allowed to swim in the river, and that's because it was so polluted. This map shows all the area through the Twin Cities that is impaired according to our state water quality standards, and you'll notice the entire stretch of the river. No stretch of the Mississippi River in the Twin Cities meets our water quality standards. So just a little detail behind that. Some of the big pollutants for the river are nutrients like phosphorus, like nitrate, and sediment. And so I'll dig into this a little bit to help you understand that. How many of you seen this picture or one like it before? The confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. All right, good. Well, we have been putting that image out for a long time because a picture really tells 1,000 words. On the right, the Minnesota River with its massive load of sediment coming in and meeting up with the Mississippi River, which, as you can see, is comparatively much, much cleaner. The Minnesota River is carrying about 10 times its historic, sort of what they call background level of sediment. And I don't know how well you can see this graph on the left here, but we know this because scientists have taken core samples from the bed of Lake Pepin, which is, as you probably know, a natural lake in the river. It's about 50 miles south of the Twin Cities. So it's a place where sediment naturally settles out because the river flows into a slower moving body of water, the lake. And so scientists have taken these core samples and they figured out that you can actually see all the different layers of sediment, and you can date those. You can see how much sediment was laid down in different layers, and you can see what's in the sediment as well. So here you can see this map or this graph shows the natural background of sediment, and then in the whatever that number is, middle of the 19th century, you see people starting to farm our landscape up here in this watershed. And then middle of the 20th century, you can see it really spiking. This is the onset of industrial agriculture. So massive, massive pollution from sediment, which has all kinds of negative impacts to all the critters that depend on the Mississippi River for their life, including us. One of the things that we do, one of the things we use the river for is moving bulk commodities up and down to global markets, and sediment is a major inhibitor of that. So the Army Corps of Engineers spends millions of dollars every year dredging the river, and some of you who followed the drought stories from this past summer will remember that many barges ran aground last summer because there wasn't enough water, too much sediment in the river and not enough water, and couldn't continue commercial navigation in many places. This is a figure showing annual nitrate concentrations as measured at the Hastings Dam. Nitrate is the main ingredient in fertilizer that we use in our annual commodities. And you can see from 1976 to 2014, we registered a 44% increase in nitrate concentrations at Hastings. The photo behind it is the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a hypoxic zone where there's such little oxygen that the living creatures that can't swim or crawl away perish. So a major environmental problem caused by the way that we practice agriculture on the landscape nowadays. So you can see this is Minnesota Pollution Control Agency data for Minnesota showing where the nitrate to surface water comes from. And you can see by far the largest sources are from agriculture. Cropland runoff, cropland tile drainage, that's the underground drain tiles that are underneath our cropland groundwater, so that's the groundwater sources to surface water. So most of our nitrate is coming from these agricultural landscapes. And it's caused by, situations like this where you get a big rain in the spring and it carries soil and nutrients that were put on the land off to the local water body. These are drain tile outlets. So this is another image of the confluence, the base of Pike Island there, and you can really see the impact. So one of the things that we're intent on doing now is trying to figure out new ways to manage this. And one of the things that we're very excited about is the potential to grow a new, more diverse range of crops on our landscape. This illustration shows summer annual crops on the left with very shallow root systems, and shows the subsurface transfer of nutrients and sediment to water bodies, versus perennial and winter annual crops, which are just beginning to be developed and come online as commercially viable crops now, that have these much longer root systems. They're in the ground for multiple years. They hold the soil in place. They take up nutrients. And so it's a new kind of technology using crops themselves that we think farmers are going to want to plant because it's a new commodity that they can sell, that will also be good for soil health and protect water quality and climate to a certain extent as well. This is a little illustration, if it will run. No, it didn't run for some reason, I'm sorry. Of the maybe I can see if I can get it to go here. There we go. Thank you. This is just showing you the entire drainage basin of the Mississippi River. And you can see this dendritic pattern, how much of the continental United States drains to the Mississippi River. So you can see a river basin this large is going to require solutions that are that scale. You can't just do something in a small area and expect it to help the whole river. This is kind of a gratuitous image of the dead zone, hypoxic, a huge fish kill down in the Gulf. I wanted to also mention that it's not just the river that is polluted with these nitrates. This is a map of polluted drinking water wells, public and private drinking water wells around Minnesota with higher elevate. The red ones or dark orange are the ones that are above the standard, and the lighter ones, the yellow color, is ones that have elevated, so not yet above the standard, but getting there. So we're all affected, not just those of us that depend on the Mississippi River for our drinking water. Some of these crops that I mentioned, like kernza, which is a perennial wheat-like crop, will have a market because they can be turned into bread and cereal, and of course, my favorite, beer. Here again, you can see the long roots of the perennial kernza next to the much shorter roots of the annual crops that we grow on the landscape now. Winter annual crops are another important piece of this. So you've got your perennial crops that you put in place and they grow for 3 or 4 years, and you can continue to harvest them. And then after 3 or 4 years, you move them into a different area in the farm and you put something else where they were. Winter annual crops go between your summer annual crops. So they're planted in the late summer, early fall. They take root, they germinate. They spend the whole winter growing slowly, but they're also holding the soil in place. So, and then they're harvested in the spring before the next annual crop goes in. And so farmers have an incentive to do this because instead of 2 crops, they now have 3. They have a more diversified cropping system. And these winter annuals are taking up nutrients, they are improving soil health, and they're adding to the farmer's bottom line. And so that's why we're very excited about these new technologies as a sort of agriculture-friendly way to address the water quality problem that we're facing. These are some other perennial crops like hazelnuts and silphium, which we think will have important commercial markets. Some more photos of this is a kind of like a perennial sunflower, and a bunch of organizations that we have that we're collaborating with to under the banner of the Forever Green Partnership. So these are environmental groups, farm organizations, agribusinesses that are working to advance these new cropping systems. And we're doing that predominantly through public policy. We have a number of pieces of legislation before the legislature this winter to advance these kinds of cropping systems. And I can say more about that later if you're interested. I wanted to say one other thing about this water quality space, about a major new federal initiative that we're working to pass. This is Congresswoman Betty McCollum's legislation. It's called the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative. And it's a federal program that would bring $300 to $350 million a year to the 10 main stem states along the river, starting here in the headwater state all the way down to Louisiana. It's based on the other very similar programs like it around the country, including the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. These are some of the things that it will be focused on: clean water, protecting river habitat, natural infrastructure, so restoring wetlands and floodplains along the river, and then addressing aquatic invasive species. I mentioned the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. There are several other so-called geographic programs that are run out of the EPA that have been very successful, had bipartisan support for years, and are really helping to improve the health of these important ecological features like the Great Lakes or Chesapeake Bay. And yet the river, the Mississippi River, may be arguably the most significant of our national ecological features, does not have a geographic program yet. So we're hoping to change that. How am I doing on time? We're kind of running out here. So I'll skip through some of these. One of the things that we're very focused on is thinking about how our communities develop along the river. And so we have a whole program that is focused on helping communities think about how to build and develop in a way that enhances and protects the river and provides the public, us, access to the great river. I mentioned that the river is a national park. It's also been the subject of statewide rules to protect it that my organization was the lead advocate for. And I won't say more about that today. These are some of the sites along the river that where we've been engaged in land use and planning discussions around the river. The new rules. This is a photo of the above the falls stretch of the river looking toward downtown. This area will be, in the next 2 decades, will be almost entirely converted from industrial uses to parks and new neighborhoods along the river, and we hope to be very involved in that process. The Upper Harbor Terminal along the river in North Minneapolis is kind of one of the main areas that will be transforming perhaps soonest, and we've been very, very closely involved in that. One thing that you may have heard of that I should make sure to mention today is the possibility that some of the locks and dams on the river in the Twin Cities could have a very different future and potentially could be removed in the next 10 to 20 years. The Army Corps of Engineers that owns and manages these locks and dams no longer uses these 3 upper locks on the system for commercial navigation. And they were built to facilitate commercial navigation, and so the Corps, their view is now, well, we don't need them, we want to get rid of them. And they are conducting a disposition study now. It'll be a long study where they look at, is there some other use? Is there somebody else who wants to buy this or take it off of our hands? And if not, it's possible that they could be deconstructed and removed. So just a little geography lesson. Upper St. Anthony Falls is the top one in the system. The Corps owns the lock, but the dam is owned by XL. It's been creating hydropower for many years, and it's not proposed to be, the dam is not proposed to be removed. Lower St. Anthony Falls, just downstream of Upper St. Anthony, though, is owned by the Army Corps, and that may be a target for removal. And then, of course, Lock and Dam number 1, what people often refer to as the Ford Dam, is the second one. So very interesting prospect. Could be a huge, huge change in the way that we relate to our river and would have a massive impact on the way the river looks and feels and how we might use it. This is an artist's rendering of what the gorge above St. Anthony, or Lock and Dam number 1, the Ford Dam, might look like if the dam was removed. Historically, this was about a 7-mile stretch of rapids. And obviously the artist is imagining what it might be like if it was restored rapids that would attract whitewater paddlers and inner tubers and anglers and everything else. So it's an interesting vision. My organization, here's another image looking upstream from the Lake Street Bridge about what it might look like. My organization does not yet have a position on whether the dam should be removed. It's an enormously complicated thing to study. It will be costly to do, and we're waiting to have more information. But very, very intriguing possibility. So I'll leave you with this slide. I hope this has been somewhat educational, and if we have a minute or two for Q&A, I'll take those if you have any. Yeah.
You said the wells are showing pollution. Does that mean things like the Jordan Aquifer, which of course where I get my water? Do you know how far down that's going into the aquifers or other wells sources?
So the question was, is when I was showing the slide showing wells that were contaminated with nitrates, does that mean that the whole aquifer is polluted? And no, generally we're talking about the well itself, not the whole aquifer. Although the pollution of segments of the big major aquifer, like the Jordan Aquifer, is something we should be concerned about. But no, I should also say that for the public wells, where it's owned by a city, they're required to meet standards for the water that they provide to you. So what that means for those of us who drink groundwater is our cities are having to spend extra money, either taking nitrates out of the water or digging multiple wells, deeper wells, so that they can blend the water so it stays below.
One more question. Anyone?
I have one. When you mentioned the soybean field and you're going to convert it, as you worked on the deal, is it naturally, or are you going to go in there and does it go back to prairie land?
Right. So the question is the slide I showed of the formerly agricultural field that was restored to native prairie. Did that restoration happen naturally, or did we help it along? And we did help it along. So we went in there and we planted a diverse mix of prairie seeds to make it grow back. And that photo was taken about 4 years ago. So if you went out there this coming summer, you would see tallgrass prairie, beautiful blooming forbs, and lots of wildlife.
Whitney, will you be available for some more questions?
I will stick around if you want to ask other questions. Please come up and say hi. Thank you for having me.